The royal scan was a machine of infallible math. For 10,000 years, it sifted through trillions of souls to find the genetic absolute, the one being born to wear the crown of the core. It didn't make mistakes, it didn't stutter, until it swept over a rust-choked mining rig on the edge of nowhere and locked onto a human with grease under his fingernails and a bad knee. The machine screamed, "King." The galaxy screamed error. Andrew tasted it before he saw it. It started as a sharp, metallic tang on the back of his tongue, like licking the terminal of a 9-volt battery. Then came the pressure. The air inside the maintenance shaft of Sector 4 went thick and heavy, pressing against his eardrums until they popped. He dropped his wrench. It hit the grating with a dull, unimpressive clank. "Caleb," Andrew rasped, coughing to clear the sudden dryness in his throat. "Did you blow the primary manifold again?" Caleb didn't answer. Andrew wiped a mixture of sweat and hydro grease from his forehead, leaving a dark smear across his brow. He favored his left leg as he stood, the cartilage in his knee grinding in that familiar, agonizing way it always did when the station's artificial gravity fluctuated. The maintenance shaft smelled like it always did: stale sweat, burnt copper, and the distinct sour odor of recycled air that had been breathed by too many people for too many years. But beneath that, something new was creeping in: ozone, crisp, sterile, and terrifyingly cold. Andrew grabbed the handrail and hoisted himself out of the access hatch. The corridor of the Tartarus mining station was bathed in the sickly yellow glow of emergency lighting. Usually the station rattled. It was a massive dying beast of iron and cheap plasteel groaning against the vacuum of space. Right now, it was dead silent. "Caleb!" Andrew called out again. He found the younger man standing by the viewport in the main galley, frozen. Caleb held a lukewarm packet of synth broth in his hand. He wasn't looking at Andrew. He was staring out the scarred, reinforced glass. Andrew limped over, annoyed. "If the foreman catches us slacking while the scrubbers are down, he's going to dock us both half a cycle's pay." "I need that pay, Caleb. I've got creditors breathing down my neck who don't care about—" Andrew stopped. He looked out the viewport. The starfield was gone. In its place was a wall of pristine, blinding white. It wasn't a single ship. It was an armada, so massive its sheer gravitational footprint was causing the Tartarus to shudder in a silent, structural panic. The vessels were flawlessly smooth, lacking the brutalist pipes and exhaust vents of human engineering. They looked like porcelain knives suspended in the dark. "The Valerian Vanguard," Caleb whispered. His voice trembled. He dropped the synth broth. The packet burst on the grated floor, brown liquid seeping into the rust. Andrew's stomach dropped. The Valerians didn't come to the outer rim. They ruled the core. They were a species so obsessed with genetic purity, lineage, and immaculate order that they considered humanity a minor, unfortunate fungal infection on the edge of their lawn. "What are they doing here?" Andrew asked, though his brain was already racing through a Rolodex of his recent crimes. Had he bought stolen power cells? Yes. Did he bypass the colonial tax grid? Obviously. But you didn't send 100 dreadnoughts to collect a few thousand credits from a mechanic. Then the hum started. It was a vibration that bypassed the ears and settled directly in the bones. Andrew's teeth rattled. The hairs on his arms stood on end. The royal scan. He had heard stories in the cantinas, drunken ramblings from void traders. The Valerian emperor had died a month ago without an heir. The core was tearing itself apart, waiting for the ancient autonomous machine to sweep the galaxy and find the exact genetic sequence destined to rule. It sweeps everyone, the traitors had said. Doesn't matter if you're a beggar or a lord. The scan looks at your blood, your marrow, the electric hum of your brain. Andrew felt a sudden, intense heat in his chest. He gasped, clawing at his stained coveralls. It felt like someone had shoved a hot iron rod between his ribs. "Andrew?" Caleb backed away. "Andrew, what's wrong with you?" Andrew looked down. His chest was glowing. It wasn't a metaphor. A physical, brilliant beam of golden light was piercing straight through the heavy plasteel hull of the Tartarus, ignoring the station's shielding entirely. It hit Andrew dead in the sternum. He couldn't move. His muscles locked. The ache in his knee vanished, replaced by an overwhelming, terrifying numbness. The light was so bright it burned through his closed eyelids. It didn't feel divine. It felt invasive, like a medical instrument scraping against his soul. And then, just as quickly as it started, the light snapped off. The pressure vanished. Andrew collapsed onto the grating, gasping for air. He tasted blood. He had bitten his tongue. "Andrew." Caleb's voice was barely a squeak. Through the viewport, the massive white dreadnoughts were moving. They weren't passing by. They were rotating. Hundreds of massive docking collars, weapons banks, and observation decks were all turning to face the Tartarus. The station's comm system shrieked. It bypassed the encrypted channels and blasted through the public address speakers, so loud it made the dust shake from the ceiling panels. "Target acquired. The Sovereign is found." Andrew rolled onto his back, staring at the flickering, grease-stained ceiling of the galley. His heart was hammering a frantic, uneven rhythm against his ribs. "Gotta be a glitch," Andrew muttered, spitting a glob of blood onto the deck. "Gotta be a damn glitch." The airlock breached 20 minutes later. Andrew hadn't run. There was nowhere to go. The Tartarus was locked down, its rudimentary computer systems completely overridden by the Valerian fleet. He sat on an overturned crate in the loading bay, a heavy pipe wrench resting across his thighs. It was a stupid weapon against plasma rifles, but gripping the cold, heavy iron was the only thing keeping his hands from shaking. The heavy blast doors hissed, protesting as external servos forced them apart. A cloud of pressurized vapor rolled into the grimy loading bay. The smell hit Andrew instantly. It was aggressive in its cleanliness. Lavender, pure oxygen, bleach. It sliced through the comforting stench of engine oil and rust like a scalpel. They marched in. A dozen soldiers clad in armor that looked like carved ivory. There were no seams, no bolts, no visible power packs, just fluid, silent lethality. They fanned out, their visors opaque and featureless. Andrew tightened his grip on the wrench. His palms were slick with sweat. He swallowed hard, trying to slow his breathing. "Just play dumb," he told himself. "Hand over the smuggled cells. Take the fine. Beg if you have to." A figure stepped through the ranks. He wore no helmet. He was tall, impossibly tall, as all Valerians were, with pale skin that looked like polished marble and hair the color of spun silver, pulled back tight. His uniform was a midnight blue tailored so perfectly it offended Andrew's eyes. The Valerian surveyed the loading bay, his lip curled upward by a fraction of a millimeter. Disgust. "Who is in command of this facility?" the Valerian asked. His voice was smooth, resonant, and entirely stripped of emotion. Andrew stood up. His bad knee immediately protested with a sharp twinge. He leaned slightly to the right to compensate. Station managers in Habitat Ring 2. If this is about the colonial tariffs, I just work here. I'm a mechanic. The Valerian's icy blue eyes snapped to Andrew. He didn't look at Andrew's face. He looked at Andrew's chest, at the exact spot where the golden light had burned him. The Valerian took a step forward. The pristine white boots stepped over a puddle of leaked hydraulic fluid. Identify yourself, the Valerian commanded. Andrew Scott. The Valerian reached into his tunic and pulled out a small, glass-like tablet. He glanced at it, then back at Andrew. He studied the grease on Andrew's cheeks, the frayed collar of his shirt, the scuffed, steel-toed boots that had lost their tread 3 years ago. I am Commander Gideon of the Royal Vanguard, the Valerian said. The words seemed to stick in his throat. He looked profoundly ill. Look, Commander, Andrew started, lifting a hand in a placating gesture. I don't know what your scanners picked up, but the tech on this station is ancient. It throws false positives all the time. Radiation leaks, ghost signals. You guys probably chased a solar flare. Gideon stared at him. The silence stretched. The only sound was the distant, rhythmic thump of the station's failing water cycler. Then, Gideon did something that made Andrew's blood run entirely cold. He unclasped his ceremonial sword from his hip. He dropped it to the grimy metal deck. It landed with a sharp clatter. Slowly, stiffly, as if fighting every muscle in his own body, Commander Gideon sank to one knee. The pristine white fabric of his trousers pressed directly into the puddle of hydraulic fluid. Around him, the 12 ivory-clad soldiers dropped to their knees in perfect unison, a wave of white sinking into the dirt. The royal scan is infallible, Gideon said to the floor. His voice was tight, strained, laced with a venom he was desperately trying to suppress. It does not chase solar flares. It has recognized your genetic resonance by the laws of the core, encoded before the stars cooled. Gideon closed his eyes, his jaw clenching so hard Andrew thought the man's teeth would shatter. I greet you, Sovereign. Andrew stared at the top of Gideon's head. He looked down at his own hands. They were covered in black grime. He had a fingernail that was turning purple from where he'd smashed it with a hammer yesterday. You've got to be out of your damn minds, Andrew whispered. Gideon looked up. The hatred in his eyes was naked now. It was raw and burning. He hated Andrew. He hated the rust. He hated the smell of the station. And most of all, he hated the ancient laws that forced him to kneel in the muck before a human. My personal sentiments are irrelevant, Gideon said, rising to his feet. The dark stain of oil on his knee made Andrew want to laugh hysterically. You are coming with us. The Chancellor awaits you on the Aegis. I'm not going anywhere, Andrew said, taking a step back and raising the wrench slightly. I have a shift to finish. You want to play dress-up? Find someone else. 2 of the guards were on their feet before Andrew even blinked. They didn't draw weapons. They simply moved with terrifying, fluid speed. One grabbed Andrew's wrist, twisting it just enough to send a shock of white-hot pain up his arm. The wrench dropped. The other guard clamped a hand on Andrew's shoulder, locking him in place. Their grip was like an industrial vice, cold, hard, and unyielding. This is not an invitation, Andrew Scott, Gideon said, turning his back and walking toward the airlock. You are the emperor, and you will be escorted to your throne, whether you walk there or we carry you." They dragged him. Andrew fought, kicking and swearing, his boots scraping against the deck plates. But it was useless. As they hauled him through the airlock, leaving the smell of rust and home behind, Andrew caught a final glimpse of Caleb standing in the shadows, his eyes wide, terrified, watching a mechanic being dragged off to rule the universe. The decontamination process was violently thorough. They stripped him in a sterile, white room aboard the Aegis. Andrew had shouted, threatened to sue, threatened to punch someone, but the medical drones ignored him. They sprayed him with a hot chemical foam that smelled like burnt ozone. It stung his skin, burning away the ingrained grime of 10 years in the shipyards. They scrubbed him with sonic brushes that vibrated so intensely they left his flesh pink and raw. When they were done, Andrew felt naked in a way that had nothing to do with clothes. The dirt was his armor. It was proof he worked, proof he survived. Now he was just pale skin and knobby joints. A drone presented him with garments, silk, or something like it. It was a deep, shifting crimson that caught the light, embroidered with gold geometric patterns. Andrew put it on. It itched. It was too light, lacking the comforting weight of heavy canvas and utility pockets. He felt ridiculous, like a dog forced into a sweater. The doors slid open. 2 guards, different ones, but wearing the same identical ivory armor, escorted him down a corridor. The Aegis was massive, silent, and terrifying. The floors were a seamless black glass that reflected Andrew's bare feet. The walls hummed with immense, contained power. They arrived at a set of heavy, gilded doors. They parted silently. The room beyond was not a bridge. It was an office, but an office scaled for gods. A massive window curved along the far wall, showing the infinite sprawl of stars. In the center of the room sat a desk made of something that looked like polished obsidian. Behind the desk stood Chancellor Reginald. Reginald was older than Gideon. His silver hair was thinning, and his face was deeply lined with the kind of stress that came from managing a crumbling empire. He wore robes of dark gray, heavy and oppressive. As Andrew was shoved into the room, Reginald looked up. The Chancellor didn't kneel. He just stared. For a long, agonizing minute, the only sound in the room was the soft, synthetic whisper of the ship's ventilation. Reginald lifted a hand and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He let out a long, slow exhale. "A human," Reginald said. His voice was a dry rasp. 10,000 years of breeding. 10,000 years of genetic curation. We built dynasties that spanned galaxies. We engineered our bloodlines to eliminate disease, weakness, and madness. He dropped his hand and looked at Andrew with exhausted, hollow eyes. "And the scan chooses a mud scraper from a decaying rock." "Look, pal," Andrew said, crossing his arms. He hated how defensive he sounded. He hated that he had to look up slightly to meet Reginald's eyes. "I didn't ask for this. Your machine is busted. Send me back." "The machine is not busted," Reginald snapped, his composure cracking for a fraction of a second. "The Genesis core operates on quantum biological resonance. It measures the fundamental harmonic of a soul against the throne's frequency. It does not make mistakes." "Well, it made one today." Andrew pointed a thumb back at the door. "I'm Andrew. I owe the syndicate $4,000. I have a bad knee. I drink recaf that tastes like battery acid, and I like it. I am not your king." Reginald walked slowly around the desk. He leaned against the edge of it, crossing his long legs. Do you know why the Emperor must be chosen by the scan, Andrew Scott? Don't care. Because if he isn't, the core worlds will burn, Reginald said quietly. We have 7 major houses. Each commands fleets capable of cracking planets. When the late Emperor died without a designated heir, 3 of those houses mobilized. We are hours away from a civil war that will consume trillions of lives. Reginald pointed a long, pale finger at Andrew. The only thing keeping them from firing on one another is the sacred law of the scan. They will bow to the absolute authority of the machine. Even if it produces, Reginald's lip curled. You. Andrew felt a cold sweat prickle along the back of his neck. The sheer scale of it was suffocating. Millions of ships, trillions of lives, and him. You're going to put me on a throne and expect them to obey? Andrew barked a harsh, cynical laugh. They're going to assassinate me before I sit down. Oh, undoubtedly, Reginald said smoothly. The absolute lack of empathy in his voice was chilling. They will view you as an abomination, an insult to our species. There will be poisons, kinetic strikes, perhaps a localized black hole generated in your bedchambers. Andrew stared at him. You're insane. I am pragmatic, Reginald corrected. If you die after you are crowned, the succession crisis is legally reset. It buys the Senate time to negotiate a treaty without the galaxy burning. Reginald pushed off the desk and walked toward a silver console. He poured a clear liquid into a crystal glass. He didn't offer one to Andrew. You are a placeholder, Andrew Scott, Reginald said, taking a slow sip. You are a sacrificial anode. We will take you to the capital. We will put the crown of the core on your head. You will wave to the masses. And then, inevitably, one of the noble houses will have you murdered, and the empire will be saved. Andrew looked at the man. He looked at the vast, uncaring stars outside the window. He felt the ridiculous silk scratching against his skin. He wasn't a hero. He was a survivor. He knew how to dodge punches in a cantina, how to hotwire a plasma conduit to keep from freezing to death, and how to spot a loaded die. They thought he was just a stupid, disposable animal, a rat caught in their immaculate trap. Andrew slowly uncrossed his arms. The initial terror was beginning to fade, replaced by a slow, simmering heat in his gut. It was the same heat he felt when a foreman tried to short his pay. So, Andrew said, his voice dropping an octave, the grit of the shipyard bleeding back into his tone. Let me get this straight. You need me. Reginald paused, the crystal glass near his lips. I need the legitimacy you temporarily represent. Right, but you can't crown a corpse. Andrew took a step forward. He didn't care about the guards at the door. He walked right up to the Chancellor, ignoring the height difference. He smelled the faint, sterile scent of lavender on the man. If I die before the ceremony, your civil war starts anyway, right? Andrew asked. Reginald's eyes narrowed. That is correct. And if I refuse to do the ceremony, if I stand up in front of your whole shiny empire and tell them the machine is broken and you're all frauds, we would compel you. You can drag me, Andrew said, a grim, jagged smile touching the corner of his mouth. But you can't make me read the script. I've seen the vids, Reginald. Rulers have to speak. They have to accept the crown. A gagged king doesn't stop a war. Reginald slowly lowered the glass. The air in the room grew tense, heavy with sudden, unspoken friction. Andrew leaned in close. You think you pulled a rat out of the gutter to throw to the wolves. But here's the thing about rats, Reggie. We bite. You want me to play king to save your neck? Fine, but we're going to do it my way. Andrew tapped the Chancellor's immaculate obsidian desk with one knuckle. It made a sharp, solid sound. First, Andrew said, his eyes hard, get me a goddamn cup of real coffee. The coffee was an insult. Andrew held the porcelain cup, delicate, translucent, and probably worth more than his life, and stared at the dark liquid inside. It steamed perfectly. It smelled vaguely like roasted nuts. But the moment the brew hit his tongue, his stomach revolted. It tasted like hot brown math. There was no acidity, no bitter bite of burnt grounds that had sat on a heating element for 3 hours. It was chemically reconstructed perfection, and it was entirely soulless. Andrew swallowed it, suppressing a gag, and deliberately placed the cup on Chancellor Reginald's pristine obsidian desk. He didn't use a coaster. A faint ring of condensation immediately formed on the glass. Reginald's left eye twitched, a microscopic fracture in his marble composure. I asked for coffee, Andrew said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. That is a molecularly identical recreation of the Coffea arabica bean, grown in optimal atmospheric conditions, Reginald replied smoothly, though his gaze remained locked on the moisture ring. It is flawless. It's trash, Andrew grunted, shifting his weight. His left knee was throbbing a dull, rhythmic ache. The gravity on the Aegis was set to a crisp 1.2 Gs, standard for the towering Valerians, but a slow, grinding torture on human joints. But it'll do to keep me awake. How long until we hit the core? We are entering the atmosphere of Ethel now. Reginald turned toward the massive viewport. Andrew limped over to the glass. He expected a sprawling metropolis, maybe something like the rusted, towering hives of the outer colonies, choked with smog and neon. Instead, he saw a painting. Ethel didn't have continents. It was a single, planetary-scale architecture of white and gold. Spires that defied gravity stretched miles into a curated violet sky. There were no clouds, only atmospheric baffles that painted the sunlight into soft, flattering hues. It was a world entirely paved over, yet it looked sickeningly lush. Hanging gardens the size of small moons orbited the primary spires. It didn't look like a place where people lived. It looked like a tomb for gods. 10 billion souls down there, Reginald murmured, his voice stripped of its usual sharp edge. And every single one of them expects a Valyrian sovereign to step off this ship. When they see you, there will be a shock. Then there will be outrage. You must not flinch. I've had guns pulled on me for a bad hand of cards, Reggie. I don't flinch. Andrew lied. His heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The sheer scale of the city below was suffocating. He was a rat dropped into a surgical theater. The ship docked without a single shudder. No clanking clamps. No hiss of equalizing pressure. Just a soft chime that made Andrew's teeth ache. They didn't give him time to breathe. A team of attendants swarmed him the moment he stepped out of Reginald's office. They stripped him of the crimson silk and forced him into the ceremonial armor of the sovereign. It was heavy, not the comforting, protective weight of a hazard suit, but a suffocating, useless mass of layered platinum and woven light. The collar was too high, biting into his jawline. The chest plate compressed his lungs. It was designed for someone 6 inches taller and far more rigid. "I can't breathe in this," Andrew grumbled, hooking a grease-stained finger under the platinum collar and tugging. An attendant, a pale Valyrian youth whose eyes were wide with poorly concealed horror at having to touch a human, immediately slapped Andrew's hand away. "Do not mar the vestments. They are sacred." Andrew grabbed the youth by the wrist. He didn't squeeze hard, but the sudden, violent speed of the movement made the attendant freeze. Andrew leaned in, smelling the faint, sickly sweet scent of lotus oil on the boy's skin. "Listen to me," Andrew whispered, his voice vibrating with a low, dangerous grit. "I don't care if God himself sewed this shirt. If I pass out from lack of oxygen on that stage, your chancellor's plan goes to hell. Loosen the damn clasp." The attendant swallowed hard, looked at Andrew's unblinking eyes, and quickly adjusted a hidden node at the back of the neck. The collar relaxed. Andrew took a deep, ragged breath. Better. The doors to the docking concourse opened. Reginald was waiting, flanked by Commander Gideon and a dozen Vanguard guards. But someone else was there too. She stood apart from the soldiers. She wore a dress of midnight blue that seemed to absorb the light around it. Tailored so sharply, it looked like it could cut glass. Her silver hair was pinned up in elaborate, cruel-looking spikes. She smiled as Andrew approached, but the smile never reached her eyes. Her eyes were black, bottomless, and entirely devoid of warmth. "Chancellor," she said, her voice a purr of localized static. "You kept us waiting, and you brought a pet." "Duchess Vivian," Reginald nodded, a tense, formal dip of his chin. "Allow me to present the sovereign, chosen by the royal scan." Vivian stepped forward. She was a full head taller than Andrew. She looked down at him, her gaze raking over his scarred knuckles, the uneven stubble on his jaw, the slight slump of his shoulders. She smelled like crushed orchids and something sharp, like ozone right before a lightning strike. "Fascinating," Vivian murmured. She reached out, extending a hand with silver-capped fingertips. She didn't offer it to shake. She reached for his face. Andrew didn't back away. He swatted her hand out of the air. The smack of flesh against metal echoed sharply in the cavernous hall. Gideon's hand dropped to his sidearm. The Vanguard tensed. Vivian looked at her hand, then back at Andrew. The fake smile dissolved, leaving a mask of pure, concentrated malice. "I bite," Andrew said, staring her dead in the eyes. "It seems the machine has developed a sense of humor," Vivian said softly, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. "Enjoy the crown, little human. The metal conducts heat very well. You will burn before the cycle ends." She turned and walked away, the click of her heels sharp against the marble. Andrew exhaled slowly, unclenching his fists. His palms were slick with sweat. He looked at Reginald. "One of the 3 houses?" Andrew asked. "House Lancaster," Reginald replied, his face pale. "She commands the First Fleet. You just slapped her." "She tried to pet me," Andrew grunted, forcing his shaking hands to rest on his heavy platinum belt. "Let's get this over with." The corridor of ancestors was 3 miles long. That was the first thing they told him, and it was the only thing Andrew could think about as the heavy, gilded doors groaned open, revealing the grand hall. 3 miles of polished, black mirrored floor. Millions of Valyrians lined the colossal balconies, tier upon tier, stretching up into a vaulted ceiling that lost itself in artificial shadows. It wasn't noisy. That was the most terrifying part. A crowd of millions, and there was absolute suffocating silence. No cheers, no whispers, just the heavy crushing weight of 10 million pairs of eyes staring down at a mechanic from the outer rim. "Walk," Reginald hissed from his side. Andrew took a step. The heavy platinum boots clicked against the black glass. His knee flared, a sharp spike of agony shooting up his thigh. He gritted his teeth. He couldn't walk 3 miles like this, not without limping. And if he limped, he looked weak. If he looked weak, the wolves in the balconies would tear him apart before Reginald's civil war even started. He needed a crutch. A ceremonial guard stood to his right, holding a massive solid iron staff tipped with the Valerian crest. Andrew didn't ask. He reached out, grabbed the staff just beneath the crest, and yanked it from the guard's immaculate grip. The guard blinked, stunned into paralysis. Reginald gasped quietly. Andrew leaned his weight onto the iron staff. It was heavy, cold, and perfect. He took a step, bringing the staff down onto the mirrored floor. Clang. The sound was brutally loud. It shattered the silence of the massive hall, echoing off the high arches. It was an ugly, unrefined noise, the sound of a hammer hitting an anvil. Andrew took another step. Clang. He didn't look up at the millions of furious, disgusted faces. He looked straight ahead, toward the raised dais 3 miles away. He fell into a rhythm. Step, drag, clang, step, drag, clang. He dragged the heavy iron tip across the flawless black glass on his follow-through, leaving a faint, jagged scratch in the ancient floor. He could feel the outrage radiating from the crowd like physical heat. They worshipped perfection, and he was deliberately, loudly dragging his imperfections across their most sacred space. It took an hour. By the time he reached the steps of the dais, Andrew was drenched in sweat beneath the platinum armor. His lungs burned. His grip on the iron staff was cramped and locking up. But he hadn't fallen. He climbed the shallow steps. At the center of the dais stood a pedestal. Hovering above it, suspended in a magnetic field, was the crown of the core. It wasn't a piece of jewelry. It was a ring of shifting liquid silver, constantly folding in on itself in complex fractal patterns. It hummed, a low, bone-rattling frequency that matched the vibration Andrew had felt back on the Tartarus when the royal scan had hit him. The high priest, an impossibly old Valerian draped in heavy gold chains, stepped forward. His eyes were milky white, blind. He held a ceremonial velvet cushion, though the crown floated above it. The priest began to speak in High Valerian, a language Andrew didn't know. The words flowed like water, melodic and haunting. It was a prayer, a validation of the machine's infallible math. Andrew tuned it out. He stared at the liquid silver. The closer he got, the more the hum resonated in his chest. It made his teeth ache. It smelled like burning ozone and cold copper. "Approach, Sovereign," Reginald whispered, standing just out of sight behind the pedestal. "Bow your head. Let the metal bind to your cortex." Andrew stepped forward. He leaned the iron staff against the sacred pedestal. Another wave of silent horror rippled through the front rows of the nobility. He didn't bow. He reached out with 2 bare, calloused hands, ignoring the priest's velvet cushion, and grabbed the crown. The liquid metal was freezing cold. The moment his fingers brushed it, The shifting fractal pattern snapped instantly rigid. Andrew lifted it and jammed it onto his own head. The world exploded. It wasn't a flash of light. It was a sensory avalanche. The crown didn't just sit on his skull. It sank microscopic, cold tendrils through his scalp, interfacing directly with his neural pathways. He tasted ash. He smelled burning flesh. He heard the screaming of metal tearing in a vacuum. For a terrifying, endless second, Andrew didn't see the massive hall. He saw a galaxy mapped in red. He saw fleets moving in the dark, logistical supply chains snapping, entire agricultural planets failing under bureaucratic rot. He saw the math that the royal scan had used. The empire wasn't perfect. It was a dying, bloated corpse. The Valyrians had bred themselves into aristocratic stagnation. They were beautiful, flawless, and completely incapable of adapting. They lacked grit. They lacked the dirty, desperate, ugly urge to survive at any cost. The machine hadn't glitched. It hadn't made a mistake. It saw a sinking ship, and it bypassed 10,000 years of pristine captains to find a mechanic who knew how to patch a leak with spit and duct tape. Andrew gasped, his eyes snapping open. He staggered, dropping to one knee. His bad leg screamed in protest, but he caught himself, gripping the pedestal with white-knuckled intensity. The liquid silver of the crown solidified, turning into a jagged, dull iron band across his brow. It looked crude. It looked human. Silence reigned in the hall. Millions held their breath, waiting for him to die, waiting for the ancient tech to reject the mud scraper and turn his brain to slag. Andrew slowly pulled himself up. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving against the platinum armor. His head throbbed with a massive, terrifying migraine. He had access to the Imperial grid. He could feel the defense cannons in orbit. He looked down at the front row. He saw Duchess Vivienne, her black eyes wide with genuine shock. He saw Reginald, pale as a ghost. Andrew grabbed the iron staff. He stepped up to the edge of the dais, the jagged crown heavy on his head. The script called for him to offer a blessing in High Valyrian, to speak of peace and genetic destiny. Andrew cleared his throat. The acoustic fields amplified his voice, broadcasting the rough, unrefined gravel of his tone to 10 billion people. "My name is Andrew," he said, speaking entirely in Terran Standard. His voice echoed like a gunshot. "Your machine dragged me out of a grease pit to sit in this chair." He paused, looking directly at Duchess Vivienne. "I don't know your traditions. I don't care about your bloodlines. But the crown is on my head, and the grid just gave me the keys. So here are the new rules." Andrew leaned on the staff, a cynical, exhausted smirk breaking across his face. "Anyone who tries to kill me gets thrown out an airlock. Now somebody get me a mechanic. This armor is pinching my neck." The crown didn't come off. Andrew stood in the center of the Emperor's primary bedchamber, tugging at the jagged iron band with both hands. His fingers slipped against the dull metal, slick with his own sweat. It was fused to his skin, practically locked into the bone of his skull. Every time he pulled, a spike of white-hot nausea flared behind his eyes, accompanied by the screech of static in his auditory cortex. "Stop," Andrew grunted, dropping his arms. His chest heaved beneath the suffocating weight of the platinum armor. "Just stop pulling." "I am not pulling, Sovereign," a voice squeaked. Andrew looked down. Kneeling beside him was Bastion, an Imperial armorer who looked less like a mechanic and more like a terrified librarian. Bastian was thin, pale, and holding a set of delicate, laser-guided calipers that looked entirely useless for the task at hand. "I meant me. I was talking to myself," Andrew snapped. He limped over to a massive curved window. The city of Ethel sprawled below, a sea of glowing spires and manicured light. It made his stomach churn. "Just get this chest plate off me before I suffocate." Bastian scurried over, his hands shaking so badly the calipers clattered against the platinum. "The biometric clasps they are not recognizing my genetic signature, Sovereign. The armor has locked itself to your biological rhythm. It requires a master override from the High Priest." "I'm not calling that blind old bat back in here," Andrew said. He turned, scanning the massive room. It was absurdly large, dominated by a bed that looked like a floating marble slab covered in sheer silk. There were no sharp corners. Everything was curved, smooth, and aggressively safe. He spotted a decorative statue near the door, a heavy abstract piece of solid brass shaped like a leaping predatory cat. Andrew stomped over, his bad knee screaming with every step, and hoisted the statue. It weighed a good 30 pounds. "Sovereign, wait! That is a priceless relic of the third—" Andrew slammed the brass statue directly into the platinum clasp on his right shoulder. The impact was deafening. The sheer force sent a shockwave down Andrew's arm, rattling his teeth. The heavy, indestructible ceremonial armor dented. The delicate biometric locking mechanism inside the clasp shattered with a pathetic crunch. The pressure across his chest vanished. Andrew dropped the statue. It hit the immaculate white floor, leaving a deep, ugly gouge in the polished stone. He shrugged off the ruined platinum plates. They hit the ground with a heavy, expensive clatter. He was left in the sweat-soaked crimson silk undershirt, breathing hard, his chest finally expanding to its full capacity. "There," Andrew wheezed, rubbing his bruised collarbone. "Override accepted." Bastian looked at the ruined armor, then at the gouged floor, and quietly began to hyperventilate. Andrew ignored him. He walked toward the massive bed, intent on collapsing. But as he passed a seamlessly integrated ventilation grate in the wall, he stopped. He tilted his head. The crown buzzed against his skull, a low-grade migraine that felt like a dying fluorescent bulb. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a receiver. He could feel the Aegis in orbit. He could feel the power grid of the city, and he could feel the climate control system of his own room. Andrew pressed his face close to the vent. He closed his eyes, filtering out the smell of the room's ambient lavender scrubbers. He breathed in deep through his nose. There, beneath the floral sterility, a faint, sickeningly sweet scent, like rotting fruit mixed with copper. "Bastian," Andrew said quietly. His voice had lost its frustrated edge. It was the flat, dead tone of a man who had just found a live wire in a dark room. "Yes, Sovereign? Do you smell peaches?" Bastian blinked, confused. He took a hesitant step closer and sniffed the air. I suppose. A pleasant additive to the sleep cycle regulators?" "In the outer rim shipyards," Andrew said, reaching down to unlace his heavy steel-toed boot. "If you smell peaches in a maintenance shaft, it means the coolant lines are leaking neurotoxin. It paralyzes your diaphragm in 3 minutes. You suffocate while you're wide awake." Bastian froze, the color completely draining from his already pale face. Andrew didn't hesitate. He pulled off his heavy grease-stained boot, gripping it by the heel. He swung it like a hammer, smashing the steel toe directly into the seamless, elegant ventilation grate. The pristine plastic cracked. Andrew hit it again, and again. The noise was violent, a brutal rhythm of destruction in the quiet, sacred chamber. On the fourth strike, the grate shattered inward. Andrew shoved his bare hand into the dark duct. His fingers brushed against something metallic and foreign, a small cylindrical device magnetically attached to the inner wall. He ripped it free. It was a sleek silver canister. A tiny green light pulsed on its side, hissing out a faint mist. Andrew looked at the massive, reinforced glass of the window. "Can that open?" No, Bastian stammered, backing away. "The atmospheric seal is absolute." Andrew looked around frantically. His eyes landed on the ensuite washroom. He bolted, limping heavily, bursting through the doors. He threw the hissing canister into the massive sunken marble toilet, reached down, and smashed the manual flush override he had noticed earlier. A vortex of hyper-pressurized water swallowed the canister, sucking it down into the station's deep matter reclaimers before it could vent any further. Andrew slumped against the cold marble wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He sat there, his chest heaving, his bare foot pressed against the cold stone, holding his other steel-toed boot in his lap. The heavy oak doors to the bedchamber burst open. Chancellor Reginald strode in, flanked by 4 vanguard guards, their weapons drawn. "Sovereign, the grid registered a kinetic anomaly in your chambers." Reginald stopped in the doorway of the washroom. He took in the sight, the gouged floor, the shattered priceless platinum armor, the destroyed ventilation grate, and the Emperor of the Core Worlds, sitting on the floor of a bathroom, sweating through a silk shirt, holding a dirty work boot. Andrew looked up at Reginald. He didn't smile. He just tossed the boot onto the floor. It landed with a dull thud. "I told you," Andrew rasped, wiping a streak of dirty sweat from his forehead. "Rats bite back. Find out who put a neuro canister in my air supply, Reggie, or the next thing I smash is going to be your face." The High Council chamber was designed to make a man feel small. The ceiling was a vaulted dome of simulated daylight, casting a harsh, unforgiving glare on the circular obsidian table below. 7 massive chairs, carved from petrified starwood, ringed the table. 6 of them were occupied by the heads of the great houses. The 7th chair, larger than the rest, and positioned slightly higher, was empty. Andrew didn't sit in it. He leaned against the edge of the polished obsidian table, standing awkwardly on his good leg. He wore standard black fatigue trousers he had bullied out of a quartermaster, heavy boots, and a simple dark gray tunic. The only piece of regalia he wore was the jagged iron crown, bolted onto his skull, pulsing with a low rhythmic ache. The 6 lords and ladies of the core stared at him with varying degrees of open revulsion. Duchess Vivienne sat directly across from him, her black eyes narrowed into venomous slits. "This is a mockery," Lord Rowan of House Corvus muttered, adjusting the heavy gold sash draped across his broad shoulders. "We are in the middle of a systemic collapse, and we are forced to stand by while a tinkerer soils the council table." "I'm standing because the chair hurts my back," Andrew said flatly. He picked up a crystal stylus from the table and idly turned it over in his calloused fingers. "And because I want to look you all in the eye when you lie to me." The room stiffened. Chancellor Reginald, standing strictly at attention by the door, closed his eyes as if bracing for an explosion. "We do not lie, human," Vivian purred, leaning forward. The scent of her sharp ozone perfume drifted across the table, making Andrew's nose itch. "We deal in the reality of the Empire, a reality you cannot possibly comprehend." She tapped a silver node on the table. The center of the obsidian surface vanished, replaced by a massive, three-dimensional holographic map of Sector 9. Several planets blinked in aggressive red. "The agricultural hubs of the Perseus Reach," Vivian announced. "For 3 weeks, the quantum transport gates have been failing. Trillions of tons of grain are rotting in the silos. 3 billion citizens on the factory worlds are facing starvation. My engineers theorize a harmonic misalignment in the gate's core tachyon field. We need to divert 80% of the Treasury's emergency funds to build a new stabilizer array." The other lords nodded in solemn agreement. Andrew stared at the holographic projection. The moment the map materialized, the iron band around his head bit into his temples. Data flooded his visual cortex. Numbers, shipping manifests, energy readouts. It was like staring into a blinding sun, but instead of light, it was pure information. He didn't look at the glowing red planets. He looked at the tiny, almost invisible lines connecting them. The supply routes. Andrew reached out, his grease-stained hand passing through the hard light projection. He pinched his fingers together, zooming in on a small, insignificant way station located between the agricultural worlds and the transport gate. "Station 44 Delta," Andrew read, squinting as the crown fed him the station's specs. "It's a compression relay." "A minor logistical node," Lord Rowan scoffed. "Irrelevant to the quantum decay of the primary gate." "Nothing is irrelevant," Andrew muttered. He tapped the station. A wall of scrolling text appeared in his mind. He closed his eyes, fighting the nausea. Maintenance logs, energy output, flow rates. He opened his eyes and looked directly at Vivian. "You don't need a new stabilizer array," Andrew said, tossing the crystal stylus onto the table. It rolled and stopped against the holographic emitter. "You need a plumber." Vivian's jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" "The quantum gate isn't misaligned," Andrew explained, pushing off the table and taking a step toward her. "The gate runs on heavy water coolant, right? It cycles through Station 44 Delta to shed the thermal load before it hits the tachyon field." The Lord stared at him in stunned silence. They didn't know how the gates worked. They only knew they owned them. According to the Imperial grid, Andrew tapped the side of his own head, right beneath the Iron Crown. Station 44 Delta hasn't had its intake manifolds flushed in 4 years. The filters are choked with orbital sediment. The heavy water is bottlenecking. The gate isn't failing because of some harmonic misalignment. It's failing because it's overheating, so the safety sensors are forcing it to shut down to prevent a meltdown. He leaned over the table, his face inches from the holographic projection. "Your engineers aren't looking at the pipes because they think they're too good to touch the dirt," Andrew growled. "You don't need 80% of the treasury. You need 10 guys with hydro spanners and a pressure washer." Lord Rowan stood up, slamming his hands on the table. "You dare speak to us of pipes and filters? We are the architects of the stars." "You're slumlords in silk suits," Andrew shot back, his voice rising, carrying the raw acoustic violence of the shipyard. "You build an empire out of glass, and when a hinge squeaks, your first instinct is to tear down the whole door and buy a new one." He turned to Reginald. Chancellor, contact the First Fleet. Vivian shot out of her chair. You have no authority to command my ships. I have the crown. Andrew pointed at his own head. And unless you want to try prying it off my skull right now, in front of witnesses, you'll shut up. He looked back at Reginald. Take 3 destroyers from the First Fleet. Reroute them to Station 44 Delta. Have the Marines put on hazard suits, go down into the lower decks, and manually scrub the intake filters. If they complain, tell them the Emperor said it builds character. Reginald hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting between Vivian's furious face and Andrew's cold, unyielding stare. At once, Sovereign, Reginald bowed stiffly. Andrew looked back at the council. The absolute silence in the room wasn't born of awe. It was born of outrage. He had taken their grand, elegant tragedy and reduced it to a clogged drain. He had stripped them of their poetry. Meeting's over, Andrew said, turning his back on the most powerful beings in the galaxy. He limped toward the heavy wooden doors, his bad knee grinding with every step. Fix the damn pipes. I'm going to find some coffee that doesn't taste like a math equation. The lower levels of the Imperial Spire didn't smell like lavender. They smelled like home. Andrew stood in the center of Subdeck 14, breathing in the rich, heavy scent of atomized hydro grease and superheated copper. The lighting down here wasn't curated for perfect complexion. It was a harsh, flickering sodium orange that cast long, jagged shadows against the brutalist architecture of the planet's primary heating manifolds. The air was thick, vibrating with the deafening rhythmic thrum of massive pistons turning deep within Ethel's crust. He had ditched the Vanguard guards 3 levels up by overriding the elevator's biometric locks with a thought. The iron crown fused to his skull made his head ache with a constant, low-level static, but it had its perks. He could feel the entire building's circulatory system. He knew where the cameras were blind. He dragged a hand along a massive, thrumming plasteel pipe. His fingertips came away slick with condensation and black grime. "Hey!" Andrew called out, his voice scraping over the mechanical roar. A figure working near a pressure valve jumped, dropping a sonic welder. It was a Valyrian, but not one of the pristine, marble-skinned aristocrats from the upper decks. This man was hunched, his pale skin splotchy with chemical burns, wearing a tattered gray jumpsuit. He looked at Andrew, terrified, his eyes darting to the jagged iron crown. The worker immediately dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead against the grated floor. The metal was coated in a thin layer of toxic sludge. "Get up," Andrew said, limping closer. "I'm not doing the kneeling thing down here. Get up." The worker slowly raised his head, trembling. "Sovereign, you should not be in the exhaust sumps. The ambient radiation will probably kill me slower than the food upstairs," Andrew interrupted, picking up the dropped sonic welder and handing it back. The man took it as if Andrew were handing him a live grenade. "What's your name?" "Corin, Sovereign." "Corin, these manifolds are running hot. You've got a microfracture in the tertiary valve housing. If you don't patch it, you're going to blow a seal and flood this deck with boiling coolant." Corin stared at him, his mouth slightly open. The requisition for a replacement housing was denied 3 cycles ago. House Lancaster diverted the plasteel for a new orbital gallery. "Of course they did," Andrew muttered, rubbing his jaw. The stubble was growing in, rough and uneven. "Give me the welder." You need to bypass the secondary relay to reroute the pressure. Then, a sound interrupted him. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It was the absolute absence of sound. A localized dampening field snapped into existence, swallowing the roar of the pistons. The sudden, suffocating silence made Andrew's ears pop. The hairs on the back of his neck stood straight up. The smell of ozone instantly flooded the narrow walkway. "Corin, get down!" Andrew barked, tossing the welder aside. 3 shadows detached themselves from the overhead piping. They didn't fall. They descended with terrifying, anti-gravitic grace. They wore suits of matte black polymer that seemed to eat the ambient orange light. No faces, no armor plates, just sleek, featureless death. Assassins. House Lancaster didn't waste time. The first one raised a slender, silver tube. Andrew didn't try to dodge. He knew his bad knee wouldn't hold. Instead, he lunged forward, throwing his entire weight into a massive, heavy-duty pressure lever jutting from the primary manifold. The assassin fired. A silent, invisible, kinetic pulse tore through the space where Andrew's chest had been a microsecond prior. It clipped his left shoulder. The impact threw Andrew into the railing. Pain erupted, a blinding white-hot flare that smelled instantly of cooked meat and singed fabric. The kinetic force had cauterized the wound the moment it tore through his muscle, leaving a charred, smoking trench across his deltoid. Andrew screamed, a raw, ugly sound, but he didn't let go of the lever. He yanked it downward with his good arm. The pipe above the assassins ruptured. Andrew hadn't just rerouted the pressure, he had dead-ended it. 3,000 gallons of superheated, pressurized argon vapor blasted downward in a concentrated cone. The thermal shock hit the assassins instantly. Their high-tech suits were designed to absorb kinetic energy and dissipate lasers, not withstand being boiled alive in an industrial venting accident. The silent dampening field shattered as the vapor fried their electronics. The roar of the machinery rushed back in, joined by the shrieking of melting polymer. 2 of the assassins collapsed, twitching violently as the vapor cooked their nervous systems. The third was further back. He staggered out of the steam cloud, the front of his suit bubbling and peeling away, revealing pale, blistered skin. He raised a curved ceramic blade, charging blindly through the fog toward Andrew. Andrew was on his back, gasping, his left arm completely numb. The crown on his head was pulsing frantically, flooding his vision with hazard warnings and structural failure alerts. Override, Andrew thought violently, focusing on the grid connection. Give me the goddamn current. He reached out with his right hand, grabbing a bundle of exposed copper wiring running along the railing. He didn't pull it. He anchored himself. He stared at the charging assassin, gritted his teeth, and used the crown to open the local circuit breaker. Raw, unshielded industrial electricity surged through the floor grates. It bypassed Andrew, grounded by the copper wire he gripped. But it caught the assassin mid-stride. The man convulsed, a brutal bone-snapping jerk. Blue arcs of lightning danced across his wet, melting suit. He dropped the ceramic blade, crashing onto the deck with a heavy, lifeless thud. The steam slowly began to clear, sucked away by the emergency ventilation fans. Andrew lay there, his chest heaving, staring at the flickering orange lights. The smell of ozone was gone, replaced by the sickening stench of burnt hair and roasted flesh. His shoulder throbbed with a sickening rhythmic agony. Corin slowly peeked out from behind a massive turbine, his eyes wide with absolute primal horror. He looked at the 3 dead, elite killers, and then at the bleeding human clutching a fistful of copper wire. Andrew slowly sat up, coughing a lungful of acrid smoke. He looked at his ruined shoulder. He was bleeding now, the cauterization cracking as he moved. Hot, sticky blood soaked into his gray tunic. "Corin," Andrew wheezed, spitting a glob of metallic-tasting saliva onto the deck. "Yes? Do me a favor, find a rag, tie this off before I bleed out." Andrew pointed a trembling finger at the dead assassin. "And grab that knife. We're going back upstairs." The High Council was in session. The heavy, soundproof doors of the chamber kept out the noise of the galaxy, preserving the pristine, curated silence of Valerian politics. Duchess Vivienne was speaking, her voice a smooth, venomous purr, detailing the tragic, sudden disappearance of their new sovereign during a routine inspection of the lower wards. Chancellor Reginald sat at the table, his face ashen, looking older than his centuries. He knew what she had done. They all knew. It was the game. The heavy oak doors didn't open. They shattered inward. The noise was like a bomb going off in a cathedral. Wood splintered, raining down on the flawless obsidian floor. The vanguard guards stationed outside were sprawled on the ground, groaning, their stun batons short-circuited. Andrew stood in the ruined doorway. He looked like a nightmare dragged from the gutter. His gray tunic was soaked in dark, wet blood that dripped steadily onto the white marble floor, leaving a trail of crimson droplets. His face was smeared with black grease and soot. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, tightly bound by a filthy, oil-stained rag. In his right hand, he held a curved ceramic assassin's blade. The iron crown sat on his head, pulsing with a faint, jagged red light. Silence slammed into the room. It wasn't the silence of respect. It was the silence of absolute, paralyzed shock. Andrew limped into the room. Step, drag, step, drag. The ceramic blade scraped against the obsidian floor, a high-pitched, agonizing screech that made Lord Rowan cover his ears. "You missed," Andrew said. His voice was a rasp, stripped of any attempt at civility. It was raw, guttural, and trembling with adrenaline and pain. Vivienne stood up. Her immaculate composure cracked. Her black eyes widened as she stared at the blood, the dirt, the sheer, impossible grit of the creature standing before her. "Guards!" she shrieked, her voice pitching into a localized static whine. "Restrain this madman!" No one moved. The vanguard guards outside were down, and the internal automated defense turrets, mounted in the ceiling, were currently tracking Vivienne. Small red laser dots danced across the Duchess's throat. Andrew tapped the side of his head. "Grid's mine, Viv. Try to keep up." He reached the obsidian table. He didn't lean on it this time. He slammed his bloody left hand down on the flawless mirrored surface. The blood smeared, bright and violent, against the black glass. It was an ultimate desecration. "3 men," Andrew breathed heavily, looking around the table at the terrified aristocrats. 3 highly trained killers, sent to the exhaust sumps to fix your little problem. He locked eyes with Vivienne. "I boiled them. Then I electrocuted the one that didn't cook fast enough." Vivienne backed away from the table, her silver-capped nails digging into her own palms. "You are an animal, a primitive, savage animal. The machine is flawed. It chose a beast." "No!" Andrew snarled, slamming the ceramic knife into the table. The blade bit deep into the petrified starwood, sticking straight up. The machine chose a mechanic because your empire is broken and you're too busy polishing the hull to notice the engine is on fire. He pulled his bloody hand back, leaving a massive wet handprint on the table. He swayed slightly, the blood loss making his vision blur, but he forced himself to stand tall. The pain in his knee was entirely gone, drowned out by the fire in his shoulder and the humming static of the crown. "You think you're gods because you don't bleed," Andrew said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate gravel. He looked at Reginald, then back to the lords. "Look at my blood, smell it. It smells like iron, like copper, like rust. It's the same stuff that built your ships, the same stuff that holds your stations together. You forgot what it means to get your hands dirty to survive." He yanked the knife from the table and pointed it at Vivian. "You want a war? Fine, but we're not fighting it with pristine fleets. As of right now, House Lancaster's orbital assets are locked out of the Imperial grid." Vivian gasped. "You can't—" "I just did," Andrew interrupted. The red light of the crown flared. "I'm locking down your personal accounts, your estate access, and your private transport gates. You are grounded, Duchess. If you want to eat, you're going to walk down to the agricultural processing wards and stand in line with the citizens you've been starving." Andrew turned to the rest of the council. They were pale, shrinking back into their massive, ornate chairs. "The velvet trap is gone," Andrew said, tossing the bloody ceramic knife onto the center of the table. "I am not your sacrificial anode. I'm not playing your game. We are going to strip this empire down to the studs. We're going to fix the pipes, repair the gates, and feed the colonies. And anyone who gets in my way," he gestured to the bloody handprint on the table, "goes down to the sumps." Andrew turned his back on them. He didn't wait for a response. He limped back toward the shattered doors, his boots leaving bloody, greasy footprints across the immaculate floor. Reginald stood frozen, staring at the human. For 10,000 years, the Valerians had prized perfection. But as the Chancellor watched Andrew drag his broken, bleeding body out of the room, fueled by sheer, ugly spite, he realized the machine hadn't glitched. The machine knew exactly what the galaxy needed. It didn't need a pristine idol. It needed a wrench in the gears. Andrew stepped out into the corridor. He leaned against the wall, sliding down slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. He needed a medic. He needed a stiff drink. But most of all, he looked out the massive window at the sprawling artificial stars of Ethel, and he smiled a grim, jagged smile. He was going to need a hell of a lot of duct tape. What a brutal finale. Andrew didn't just break the mold. He smashed it, set it on fire, and forced the elite to choke on the smoke. Proof that sometimes the universe doesn't need a flawless god. It needs a human who knows how to take a hit and hit back harder. How do you think the core worlds will look after a year under Andrew's gritty rule? Drop your theories in the comments below. If you loved this deeply grounded HFY story, smash that